chair of the committee, along with my colleague Nuri Martinez. I believe Mr. Kretz is going to be joining us a little bit later. No, Mr. Kretz will not be with us today, so it's just me and Ms. Martinez. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We will start with general public comment. There are two people who have multiple cards, and so I'll allow them to speak first. Mr. Previn and Ms. Ramirez.
No, we haven't met. We haven't met for a while.
Mr. Previn. You have 2 minutes for the variety of items on the agenda you've filled out cards for, followed by a minute of general public comment for matters before the Transportation Committee.
Got it. Thank you, sir. It's Eric Previn from Studio City on the Neighborhood Council, but today speaking on behalf of myself. And for the record, it's just you and Martinez. So I don't know if that's it's 2 or 3. It's a good number. Today, once again, yeah, exactly. Today we have another sort of series of parking restrictions. And last meeting we talked about AB 516, which is being promoted by Greg Smith and somebody else, I forget who are trying to make it so that when you get 5 citations, something bad happens to you. And, you know, we are in a homeless crisis. I think that's been stipulated. Both of you have been leaders on that. And we have to do something when there's vehicles coming into the area. But the question of whether or not we want to create that kind of a harsh enforcement-like idea on behalf of the city of Los Angeles, given where we're at and how we're not doing a great job of providing places to go, has come up over and over again. You know, today you also have on your agenda an item from Toyota Foundation. I mean, I think it's extremely generous of them to come up with $850,000 to get a look at the data. I just want to emphasize that a lot of people are worried about data in this kind of activity. I don't know if one of the publications that covers this is going to report, like Englander did, rabidly about the smart boot program. When I sat here a little while ago, they had like 10,000 smart boots, and they were so elated because it was just over a short period of time. But data is tricky, right? You know, you can use it for good, or you can use it to just troll around like a dragnet. And I don't think that that's the mantra of where we're at these days. Maybe it is. Maybe you guys can speak for that. But I would certainly note that we settled a case today between the ACLU, who sued the city over data for LAPD, using the very scanners that go up on the roof that we've been engaging, not just the city DOT, but also private entities to help scan license plates. I say let's hold off on nailing people like crazy, and let's find a way to provide places for folks to be. Thank you. Now, do I get a general for general
1
public?
minute for general public comment.
Sir, you know, I know we don't always agree on everything. It's okay, we agree on some things. But I just wanted to address, you know, this committee and try to move forward. But it's a little hard to move forward without a genuine apology. Last time, what you did was you said that you'd never heard me engage in any kind of testimony that would be, you know, racism or hate speech, which I certainly appreciated your testimony, but it was not what I would describe as an apology for, and he's here today, he's a good guy. The guy got confused. He thought, hey, he goes to City Hall, he must be one of those racists. That's not okay, and it happened, and you know it happened, and your crew, including Damian Newton, who likes to attack early and ask questions later, really ought to just leave me alone, let me continue my watchdog work that the people in Los Angeles benefit from. And you, sir, you have your domain, you're a respected leader, but you can't allow people to get caught up in your dragnet of hostility towards people who you're fighting with all the time. I don't think that's appropriate, so I would request once again that you apologize, and thank you.
Thank you. Antonio Ramirez, you here? Okay. So Ms. Ramirez will waive her. This thing is not working properly, but all right. Well, I have to resort to the old-fashioned method. Ms. Martinez, I'd recommend we move items 1 through 7 and item 14 on consent. Any objection?
None.
All right, and Mr. Koretz has asked that we continue item number 8. Do we have a date until which he would like that continued?
No.
So we'll continue it
Indefinitely?
indefinitely. Okay, so item 8 is continued. And that will bring us to, throw this machine against the wall. That'll bring us to item number 9.
Yeah.
I'm going to read the item into the record.
Typically, Maria reads the item into the record.
Please, Paul.
Mr. Chairman, item number 9, this is a city attorney draft ordinance and planning department resolutions relative to the coastal transportation corridor specific plan and the West Los Angeles Transportation Improvement and Mitigation Program specific plan.
I don't think that was on the mic. Is that good enough for you?
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure we get everything officially for the record. Okay, good afternoon, everybody.
Good
How is everybody
afternoon.
doing?
Great, thank you.
Great. So before us today, we have a package of stuff, a series of ordinances, I believe 4 ordinances and a resolution to effectuate an update and a change in the West LA and the Coastal Specific Plan TIMPs. Council gave direction to do so in 2018 after a couple years of workshops and community outreach and engagement, and we now have those updated ordinances before us. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there anything we need to put into the record?
Yes, good afternoon, council members. My name is Connie Pellini-Tipton for LA City Planning Department. I'm going to read a summary of the actions for the record. I'm also here with Sean Hyrie from the Department of Transportation and Kathy Phelan from the City Attorney's Office. So very quickly, I will just read a quick summary. So we are updating, as you mentioned, the Coastal Transportation Corridor Specific Plan and the West LA Transportation Improvement Mitigation Plan Specific Plan. And this committee did hear the project last year. In June 2018, the committee approved the project for council consideration, and council instructed the city attorney to prepare the final ordinances for adoption. Today, we are here to recommend approval of the final 4 ordinances as prepared by the city attorney's office. The committee is asked to recommend that council adopt 2 specific plan ordinances, one for the Coastal Transportation Corridor, one for the West LA area, 1 trust fund ordinance for the 2 plan areas, 1 fee ordinance updating the fees, and in addition, 1 resolution with the list of eligible fee improvements, transportation improvements for each plan area. It is also recommended that the council adopt the CPC report and its findings as its own report, including those meeting the State Mitigation Fee Act requirements for adopting a development impact fee, including the findings for the statutory exemption, and find that the project was assessed in the EIR certified on March 8, 2018, and notwithstanding, determine the project is exempt from CEQA. And finally, also rescind the resolution adopted on June 1st, 2018. That concludes the summary.
Thank you. We have 2 public speakers. I have 2 public speakers listed. I suspect we actually have 3, but Matt Wersinger and Daniel Kay. Come on up. You guys can stay. Okay.
Hello.
Go ahead, Matt.
Matt Wersinger. I'm the Land Use Officer on the Delray Neighborhood Council. Hello to the council members. Our Neighborhood Council has not passed a CIS on this particular item. However, we are on record supporting fees that can be used for improvements on the west side. We're also on record noting that the infrastructure within our area has not kept pace with development, and I think that this addresses both of these very well. I'm going to give you just a couple of brief examples of some items that we deal with locally that this might be able to help with. We have a crosswalk at Englewood and Beatrice that is a school crossing. It's 1 block from Playa Elementary School. We've forwarded the councilman photographs of accidents. It's a 35-mile-an-hour zone. We have a letter from the principal begging for some sort of lighting on this crosswalk so that children can get to school safely. This was approved by DOT in 2015. We're currently unfunded because we're waiting for a developer to come in and fund it. We don't know if that's going to happen. Another example, Mindanao and Glencoe is an intersection where we need a left turn arrow. There are currently 8 intersections within 2 blocks that are rated D or F, so there's a lot of cut-through traffic that's generated here. We desperately need this. This funding would go towards these projects, and the fact is that we only have the power currently to negotiate when developers give us something in exchange for adding height or density. We need this to be a baseline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll also note, to add to PS to your comments, that Delray residents, large numbers of them, have been pushing for the streetscape for Centinela, and this is an opportunity to do that as well.
Yes, and we're on record supporting that as well.
Yep.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I gave a copy of our letter to the clerk, if you have a copy. And we'd like you to kindly consider one item on the draft ordinance that we believe is a little bit on the unusual and unjust side. Page 8, paragraph 3 phases in the implementation of the residential TIA fees, but only the residential ones, not TIA fees for other types of projects. While the new TIA fees are great for our districts, applying these new fees to old projects that have already been submitted to the planning department and the LADBS, in our case almost 2 years ago, but are not ready to issue permits yet, as we are still going through the lengthy process of clearing approximately 30 city conditions. At the time of starting our project 2 years ago, we had no way whatsoever of foreseeing these new very large fees, which in our case are very large and might prevent the project from moving forward. After 2 years of entitlement approval, LADBS approvals, countless consultants, etc. In short, it is entirely just and commendable to apply these fees to new projects that have not yet been submitted, as they can account for them before deciding to move forward. But to apply them to projects that were submitted very long ago, even before the ordinance was drafted, seems unfair.
Thank you. Thanks. Sorry, time's up.
Sure.
Commissioner, did you want to speak? I don't have your name in the system. Ron? And on that last note, I'll just ask staff, before the commissioner testifies. My understanding is that there's a phase-in for the residential because it's the new fee. There's not a phase-in for the commercial because it's been a fee since the 90s, I guess.
Correct. This is Connie Pelini-Tipton. There are existing fees for industrial and commercial uses currently for both specific plan areas. In most cases, those fees have been updated, either being adjusted slightly upward or downward. So in some cases, the fees are less than they were.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, how are you?
Hi, fine, thank you. Yeah, just on, there's a group from the Neighborhood Council, Delray Neighborhood Council, as this residents association that came together, putting together the streetscapes application, requesting the funding. And, one of the things is to not only beautify the area, which is pretty much gentrified, but also to, provide greater safety for the people crossing the streets there. We'd like, for considerations to be given to that project.
Great, thank you. And for the record, Mr. Clerk, that was Ron Cato, who is member of the Delray Neighborhood Council and is the CD11 appointee to the Los Angeles Health Commission. Thank you very much. So that concludes the public comment on this. Do you have any questions? All right. So without any objection, unless I'm missing anything, recommendation?
Read the recommendations from the city clerk.
Oh, okay. If the clerk could actually read the full recommendation into the record.
Yes, there's 9 recommendations. Recommendation number 1 is to adopt the City Planning Commission report dated June 4th, 2018, and its written findings for a statutory exemption under Public Resources Code, Section 21080B8. Recommendation number 2 is to find, based on the independent judgment of the decision maker, after consideration of the whole of the administrative record, the project was assessed in a previously certified coastal transportation corridor specific plan and West Los Angeles Transportation Improvement Mitigation Plan, specific plan environmental impact report number EMV 2014 1458 EIR SECE SCH number 2014-05-1070, certified on March 8, 2018, and pursuant to CEQA guidelines, sections 15162 and 15164, no subsequent environmental impact report, negative declaration, or addendum is required for the approval of this project. Recommendation number 3, determine based on the whole of the administrative record, the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to Public Resources Code Section 21080, B8, and CEQA Guidelines Section 15301, 15304, 15308, and there is no substantial evidence demonstrating that an exemption to a categorical exemption pursuant to CEQA Guidelines, Section 15300.2 applies. Recommendation 4, adopt an ordinance amending Section 12.04 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code to amend the CTC specific plan, an area generally bound by the city of Santa Monica on the north, Imperial Highway on the south, the San Diego Freeway on the east, and the Pacific Ocean on the west, as described in the draft ordinance attached to the City Planning Department report dated June 4, 2018. Recommendation number 5, adopt an ordinance amending Los Angeles Municipal Code Section 12.04 to amend the West Los Angeles Transportation Improvement Mitigation Plan, specific plan, an area generally bounded by the city of Beverly Hills, Beverwell Drive, Castle Heights Avenue, National Avenue, Hughes Avenue on the east, Sunset Boulevard on the north, the city of Santa Monica and Centinela Avenue on the west, and Venice Boulevard on the south, as described in the draft ordinance attached to the City Planning Department report dated June 4, 2018. Recommendation number 6, adopt an ordinance amending Articles 13.5 and 13.6 to Chapter 5 of Division 5 of the Los Angeles Administrative Code, revising the CTC and WLA TIMP trust funds. Recommendation number 7, adopt findings pursuant to the Mitigation Fee Act, Government Code 66000 et sec, and an ordinance adding section 19.19 to Chapter 1 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code to establish a transportation impact assessment fee program and guidelines pursuant to the CTC and the West Los Angeles Transportation Improvement Mitigation Plan specific plans, the ordinance to be effective 60 days from the date of adoption. Recommendation number 8, adopt a resolution establishing the list of transportation improvements to be partially funded by the Transportation Impact Assessment Fee established in Los Angeles Municipal Code Section 19.19. And finally, the last recommendation, number 9, rescind the resolution adopted on June 19, 2018.
Thank you. God bless you for reading all this. I think we need to do some calisthenics and wake back up. So what that means is when the council approves that, that will help accelerate transit-oriented future for the neighborhoods impacted, subject by the fee. The funding is a fee on development. It'll pay for transit and traffic improvements, making it easier for people to get around the neighborhoods, including new signals, neighborhood shuttles, bus rapid transit, and active transportation. It'll make neighborhoods safer and more pleasant places to walk through streetscape improvements like shade trees, benches, accessible sidewalks, and landscape parkways and medians. This is, for the impacted neighborhoods, about making development pay its fair share towards mobility improvements, and that's what this is about in the fees we're approving today. I should note that the funding is flexible within reason, and the city will prioritize projects based on community input over the life of the plan, and any individual projects will require their own approval process with the appropriate level of environmental review and community outreach, and we are not approving any particular projects today. So with that, will be the recommendation of this committee to ask the council to approve this. Do we have a date when this will be in council?
I don't remember. Not yet.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That will bring us to item number 10.
Mr. Chairman, item number 10, LA DOT report relative to the status of the Code the Curb project, creating electronic inventory of the city's parking assets in the public right-of-way.
Good afternoon. Marcel Porras, Chief Sustainability Officer, LADOT. Just to take a quick step up and above, we're presenting today, I think, 4 different items that are related in one way or the other to kind of transportation technology. And I think just wanted to echo that. Since the creation of the Bureau of Transportation Technology and more of a focus, we're now looking to weave together all the different conversations that we have with different entities so that we're all speaking with the same voice. And so I think today will be, the first report I want to talk about is the Code the Curb report. Code the Curb initiatives have become popular kind of globally to really look at how cities can digitize their infrastructure to better do right-of-way management. The City Council in 2015 adopted a motion directing LADOT to kind of launch one of these efforts. Since then, we've actually done 2, starting in 2016 and most recently again in 2018. I think and both of those efforts were led at the time through our parking, the parking side of DOT. Since those pilots have taken place, we have also brought on and developed a transportation technology strategy and also brought on additional advisors to advise the department on how to best approach right-of-way management and digital asset management. And I think one of the first analysis kind of that came back was really that the efforts that were undertaken, I think, were incomplete, and I think were very, very resource intensive. I think we've kind of pressed the reset button on it and actually have a series of task orders lined up to execute as early as the end of this month that would look at an evaluation of multiple things, such as our existing eWorks program. It would look at actually designing an asset management system for our infrastructure and the rules of kind of our curbside. And then also would lead to the actual procurement and development of that tool, as well as additional layering of actually how do we actually start doing curbside management tooling, as well as like reviewing and auditing. And so there has been previous funding set aside in past budgets that will fund the initiative, and so we're looking at activating those funds and reporting back to this committee in 6 months with the status of where we're at. I'm available for any questions.
Any questions, Ms. Martinez?
I was just curious, so will these cameras be deployed across the city, or which specific area would you be starting in?
So and the prioritization hasn't been set. I think we explored using Bureau of Sanitation's video feeds, and so I think part of the analysis.
Do they need any further updates? Alexandre?
That'll be part of the initial task order. So what we want to do is we've identified high level the technology that exists, but we want to make sure that there's continuity and bring on a consultant that can help us do that analysis and kind of lead into each subsequent task order to develop the asset management system. And so we've identified SANS video feed as a potential opportunity to facilitate the inventory, but I think we'll still need to do that analysis as part of the.
And once you gather the information, will all this be done through a computer, or are you going to need specific staff to actually analyze the video footage?
It would be through kind of using technology and machine learning algorithms to actually categorize that, but I think there's going to need to be staff to manage the initiative as well, because I think there's going to be policy questions related to its implementation.
All right, that's all I got.
Thank you for the report on this. Thank you for moving on this. This has been like a ridiculously long time in coming. I remember the first time I really heard about this. I mean, we've started engaging on it since 2015, but the first time I really heard about this was from then candidate for mayor, Eric Garcetti, at one of his very first campaign copies in probably late 2011 or something like that. So I'm glad to see that there's
Marcel was probably working on it back then.
I think Marcel was there, actually. I'm glad to see that this is moving forward. It's ridiculously frustrating that Los Angeles isn't there yet on this. I mean, no city has gotten there yet. We should really be the first. And anytime we try to do anything technological in Los Angeles, it's not just this, it's not just DOT, we always come up against these same sort of roadblocks. Is that, like, in this case, it's the existing data sets are not consistent in format, detail, stuff like that. So we actually can't integrate the various things we have. So I'm glad we're moving forward. I think we need to do something bigger than this and maybe empower ITA to do an overall sort of census or survey of where our systems just aren't connecting. Because, I mean, another thing that I talk about a lot is a public right-of-way management and reservation system where the fire department doesn't get properly notified. This is going from the curb to the street, but the fire department isn't properly notified of closing down certain streets that they may need for emergency access. So that's a fight for a different day. It's not your fight. It's a bit of a rant. So 2 years is a really long time. I get why, but I do want us to have regular report backs. I was going to suggest 180 days, so you read my mind on that when you suggested 6 months. So we'll receive and file this and then do a report back in 6. And it's okay to come back and say we're moving a lot faster than we thought.
Wishful thinking.
Item number 11.
Mr. Chairman, item 11, LA DOT report relative to the city's legal authority to implement a registration and permit program for drivers employed as charter party carriers and transportation network company operators.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Jarvis Murray with the DOT. I'm in charge of the For-Hire Regulation and Policy Department. Just to start, Los Angeles has, by some estimates, between 100,000 and 250,000 TNC drivers. And TNC transportation network companies, for those who don't know, essentially it's Uber and Lyft and companies like that. At LAX alone in 2018, there were approximately 8.9 million TNC trips. And that's a lot of trips. And while TNCs have unquestionably made it easier to get around Los Angeles, their rapid rise and essentially unregulated rise of the TNCs has also led to increased congestion as well as an increased concern related to crimes committed by TNC drivers, including sexual assault. Despite these issues, local jurisdictions have been unable to obtain any data related to TNC operations, drivers, or even driver conduct. If a driver harms a passenger right now, at best we can hope that he or she is kicked off the platform. And if they leave one platform, there's nothing that prevents them from driving for a different platform. The current status of TNC regulation is that the Public Utilities Commission, which is our state body, regulates TNCs. They began their rulemaking for TNCs back in 2012, and in 2019 they are continuing that rulemaking. They are now in phase 3 of that rulemaking, and actually as of this year, 2019, they've begun a rulemaking related to wheelchair accessibility in TNCs. And it's been 7 years since they began a rulemaking, which has clearly indicated that that has not been a priority for them in the way that it would have been for a local city. No California city at this time has taken on regulation of TNC vehicles or their drivers, and that's for a variety of different reasons. Right now, the only local regulation that currently does happen is business license regulation, which essentially all TNC drivers have to have a business license in Los Angeles if they reside in Los Angeles. And also LAX has some authority over TNCs as far as to who can enter and exit their property for use for pickups and drop-offs. But this landscape has left local cities with no ability to solve for greenhouse gas emissions. So there's nothing we can do in terms of increase greenhouse gas emissions or congestion. Again, we have no data on their vehicles. We can't do anything about accessibility at this time, including disabled access. Like I mentioned, the PUC has only begun a wheelchair accessibility TNC rulemaking as of this year. Right now, there's nothing we can do about driver conduct, and that includes background audits or requiring safety cameras in vehicles. Nothing we can do about passenger safety, i.e. drivers jumping from one platform to another, even potentially driver income, which is something that has been happening in New York City. We can't even address, even if we wanted to, issues along those lines. So ideally, to make a long story short, we would want the council to support the DOT pursuing a legislative program that gives explicit authority to local jurisdictions to regulate TNCs or their drivers and vehicles. As of right now, we do, meaning the DOT, we were asked to come back with whether there's any authority for the DOT to implement a TNC registration program. And while we have some ideas, any statement by us as it relates to legal authority is subject to city attorney review, and they can provide that to you separately. But we do believe that Public Utilities Code 5371.4 does allow cities and airports to adopt and enforce reasonable permit requirements for charter party carriers, which are TCPs, and TNCs. TNCs are a subset of TCPs. And the PUC, by its own determination, has clearly stated that TNCs are a subset of TCPs. Today, the Public Utilities Commission does not do driver permitting, and there's no indication that they intend to do this. There's already driver permitting in other cities. Like I mentioned before, New York City currently does this. Seattle does this. Chicago does it. Toronto does it. Portland also does it. But no local city in California has done this. And so any permitting by a local jurisdiction would also require some technology investment. Marcel mentioned earlier technology, and that's exactly what would need to happen in order for that to even happen in Los Angeles. And while I'd like to present more data related to that, because we're a local jurisdiction, do not have any access to any TNC data. So again, while we do believe that there is an opportunity to pursue a driver permitting program under 5371.4, we honestly think that the best avenue is to allow DOT the authority to pursue a state legislative program that offers explicit authority to local jurisdictions to regulate TNCs.
Dear Lord, yes. I mean, that's my bottom line. I mean, I think we should be giving you the authority to seek any and all ability to manage TNCs. I use every form of transportation. The other night, I took the LA Now neighborhood shuttle to a meeting in Del Rey, and then I took a lift back. I think they all are wonderful and they all serve a purpose. But the phenomenon we're dealing with TNCs reminds me of in my younger days when I was dating. You see an online profile and you think, oh, this is it. And then in person, it turns out to be a very different experience. And that's been a little bit like what's happened with TNCs. I mean, when we first heard about them, first of all, it was going to be carpooling, essentially, is what we originally did. And then it wasn't quite that, and we were told it was going to be an important mobility option. It's going to complement transit, walking, biking, and help Angelinos reduce their reliance on a personally owned vehicle. But what we're seeing more of is they're taking market share from transit, increasing VNT, congestion, and emissions. And there's some other studies we're beginning to see now that associate TNCs with increases in collisions and injuries. So there's a lot more to learn, a lot more data to come. The industry, consumer practices are still settling, but it's certainly not clear at this point that it's a net benefit to Los Angeles, to our neighborhoods, or to our mobility objectives. It may still could be, but I think it would definitely take the hands of local regulation to help make that happen. That would give us the ability to make sure there are more share rides, more equitable access, more sustainable fleets, among other things. Less deadheading, less double parking, less competing with transit. And the state has been MIA as a regulator. We went back and forth on this when I was new on the council, and, you know, Mr. Krikorian, to his credit, didn't think the PUC would do enough and really wanted us to fight for more local control, and in hindsight, he was right, because the PUC has not stepped up, and we're dealing with the consequences here. So I'm totally down to change that paradigm. I think we have some asks of not just DOT, some other departments, but that's my personal view. Any thoughts or questions?
I'm just here to tell you I told you so. That's why I never dated online. But, so I have a couple of questions for, so has the city attorney determined whether the city has the authority to implement an additional regulations at the business license phase of the permitting process? Have we determined whether we can do that or not?
I think the best option is for the city attorney to report back,
Okay.
likely on something like that for you, because I do think that takes a longer discussion.
Okay.
But the city
I
attorneys will
think
be
we should start to figure that out for ourselves.
correct.
And in regards to that same question, I was wondering, how about the airport, at the airport level? What does that permitting authority look like? Does LAWA have that authority over their property?
Yes, they do.
Okay,
They have it as under 5371.4, but they also have a general order produced by the PUC that gives them the right to do that. So they do have a permitting process. I don't know all the details related to it,
Okay, that's what I was
but
wondering.
someone from LAWA could definitely speak to that process.
And the other question I had, I've got several questions, Mr. Chair. So given the recent lawsuits against one of the TNC companies regarding concerns in terms of safety of passengers because of sexual assaults, what authority do we have to ensure that we have stricter regulations out of concern for public welfare? Can you speak to that?
You know, unfortunately, I think that would call for something of a legal opinion. And in terms of what our authority would be,
Can you
again,
speak to that, Mr. City Attorney? No? Okay.
We'll do it.
A report, okay. I really am interested in that piece. And in terms of, maybe these are other questions, so you talked about trying to get more, being given authority to go to Sacramento and hopefully get somebody who's interested in this issue, but do we have a sense whether Sacramento is at all interested in taking this issue up? I think I asked that about every other issue in the city, right? I never know who our lobbyist is in Sacramento because they don't communicate with us, or the council, I should say. I've never gotten any intake. And
it's
I'm
not
always
clear.
opposing something that someone else is supporting, so whatever.
right, and it's not clear who in Sacramento would be interested in taking that on.
Why don't we
However,
have a lobbyist?
there are.
Maybe we should have that person come in.
Right, and in the report, there are a couple of bills that relate to TNCs that are being mentioned, so I do think that the appetite is increasing. But I think in terms of making it explicit,
Well, someone who's interested at least in talking about this issue in regards to local authority. I mean, who would in Sacramento would be interested in carrying that piece of legislation for us?
you know, I think I would leave that up to our lobbyists to talk
Whoever
to those.
they are.
Yes, talk to those people.
And so, you know, part of the report talked about AB 880.
Correct.
Do you know what the impetus was regarding 880? Because it's interesting how they only talk about security fraud, but they leave other felony convictions out of the bill. Do you know why?
You know, I honestly don't know why, and we did take a look at that, and
Anybody, Mr. City Attorney, do you know what
I don't.
the impetus
don't.
of that bill was?
but for us, you know, the reason we mention it is because we feel that it does open the door to looking at driver background checks.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the author either.
Yeah, I think Oltermeyer might be
Yeah,
the
I
name.
don't know where, is that a man or a woman? Where that
No, I don't know,
person's
to
from?
be quite honest. But we think that bill, along with 1142, are steps in the right direction. They're not everything that we need, but we think they're steps in the right direction.
It
and
opens the door.
It opens the door. And we'd want to be able to work with the other cities and the bill's authors to try to shape them in a way that suits our goals.
And maybe, Mr. Chair, you can help answer this question. So I understand that Metro's looking at congestion pricing, right? And also possibly a possible fee for the TNC vehicles. And so I was wondering if the fee goes into effect, do we have a sense of whether this might affect congestion? you guys talked about that?
I mean, the conversations at Metro have been very, very preliminary on both, and there's really no meat on the bones at this point for either. On the question of the fees on TNCs, I think everybody was sort of interested in it. I think Mr. Krikorian appropriately and wisely raised the question of why Metro should be assessing and collecting fees when the TNCs would primarily be driving on our roads, and why we wouldn't be.
Yeah, I've heard him make those same comments. So I guess I'm trying to think of other methods that we can use to address congestion caused by single passengers trips in regards to the TNCs.
Well, and again, I think we need to make a push in the state legislature to get that explicit authority to do so. Because while we may have, I mean, again, the DOT, and we've stated our position, is that we think that 5371.4 allows us some entryway into handling drivers. Yeah. We still think that it's best to start off with the complete legal opinion from the city attorney's office, and more importantly, pursue the state legislation.
So when can we anticipate having that report back from you, Mr. City Attorney?
Well, we've had discussions with Jarvis and other people at DOT. We're still gathering information regarding, we're looking at what other cities are attempting, what other cities want as well, what the airport can do, what we think they can do. And as soon as we get that information, so I'm guessing maybe 60 to 90 days.
Okay.
Right. And you could actually even also approach LAWA regarding the things that they could do with their permitting, because they do have explicit authority to permit. So there are things that you could do to expand that authority, or say to establish more conditions or less conditions for LAWA. And the same with the business license registration. If you want to talk to the Office of Finance about establishing higher conditions for obtaining a business license, that is something I think that the city can do, and that can do immediately.
Right, because the airport, if they would issue a permit, could actually do a lot of these things by forcing people who are domiciled in Los Angeles to actually register with a business office before they can even operate at the airport.
Right, and the airport would have a broader reach, because it wouldn't just be people who domicile in Los Angeles.
Do we have any idea if they're looking into that?
So I was going to make some recommendations on that. I'll read the recommendations, and then maybe we can tweak them or add them. One, receive and file the LA DOT report. 2, request the city attorney to report back within 90 days with a legal analysis of the options for exercising regulatory, and I'm going to add, and fee-setting authority discussed in the LA DOT report. 3, request LAWA in consultation with LA DOT to report back in 90 days on the feasibility of including driver permitting and or data sharing requirements in their TNC program. They want to add to that one. 4, direct the Office of Finance in consultation with DOT to report back in 90 days on current compliance with business licensing requirements by TNC drivers and the feasibility of adding other regulatory requirements. And 5, direct CLA in consultation with DOT to report back in 90 days on options for sponsoring and support for state legislation to improve regulatory oversight over TNCs. That hits the areas you want. I don't know if is it full enough on the LAWA one, or is there more you wanted to get to on LAWA?
No, I mean, I don't have the answer to the question, so it'd be great if we can figure out what kind of authority they have over operators on their property. And I'm fine with what you just outlined.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine.
All right, so without objection, that is the direction of the committee. Thank you for the report.
Thank you.
And, okay, that brings us to item number 12.
Mr. Chairman, item number 12 is a report from the Transportation Department relative to the feasibility of implementing a pilot loading zone program in downtown Los Angeles for transportation network companies.
Good afternoon. So I know there's a lot of interest in TNC, so we're here to continue that conversation. So we've been asked to look at the feasibility of creating a pilot program for TNC zones. And really, to create a successful pilot program, we need the cooperation of Uber and Lyft. So specifically, we've been asking...
I'm sure our recommendations on the last item don't help that very much.
We'll get to that. So specifically, we do need the cooperation of the companies. And we are looking for the data such as where are the highest pickup and drop-off locations, time of day, and we need specific blocks, not just, oh, it's in this roundabout area. So we've been asking for this information from the companies since January 2019 and haven't got an answer yet. We also need a commitment from the Uber and Lyft to be able to commit to geofencing those pilot program areas so that we can have better compliance. And geofencing is really within the app being able to tell the drivers and passengers to meet at those designated locations. Without that, it comes down to enforcement, which can be very difficult. So while we're waiting for that information, we've reached out to other cities that we know have done a similar type of pilot, which is San Francisco and DC. And so we've spoken to them, we've heard lessons learned from them, they've given us good feedback that we can use towards helping devise our own guidelines. And so what we're asking is for another 120 days so that we may continue to try to meet with Uber and Lyft to get the data, and also to develop a more refined guidelines for the pilot program. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
So this started from a motion from Mr. Weezer, right? Asking for...
Yes, it did, yes.
Yeah. And there have been some conversations with Uber and Lyft, but they're not very far along.
Yeah, so we've had a number of conversations over the phone and through communicating through email, and they're very polite, but we have yet to receive the data that we've requested.
Because, I mean, there's like two separate issues here. Part of it's on us, but the other part is on them, and we can't do what we need to do without them. And the part that's on us is there are more people arriving to popular destinations as passengers instead of drivers, and that means to maintain safety and to manage traffic, we need to do a better job providing loading space at the curb to help to manage that, reduce double parking. And,
absolutely.
And block bike lanes, any number of things.
Yes.
But we can't do that without better cooperation from the companies. Because we want to help them, we want to help the passengers, we want to help everybody by citing them in good locations and making sure that where we're citing stuff is workable for anybody.
Exactly.
Data is helpful on that. So since I'm certain Uber and Lyft were listening to the last conversation, they probably haven't turned off the phone or the squawk box yet. I know that the companies are resistant to regulation from cities. One way to head off regulation from cities is by being good. So here is an opportunity to be good and to be helpful and to be cooperative, and this can be a partnership. The more we work together, the less there is a need for us to sort of get into the weeds on regulation. But we're not feeling the love, and this is a way to send us some flowers.
That sounds like my conversation with my daughter every day. I'm not feeling the love. Just wait, Mike. They grow up.
And I do want to point out that this is really something that benefits the companies, not just the residents of LA. This is something that's in their interest. And so, but we do need the cooperation.
Did San Francisco and DC tell you how they went about getting the data?
As far as DC, yeah, they basically, they went through a very extensive effort of having discussions with them, meeting with them, but eventually they were able to receive the anonymized data, which is non-specific to destination, time, or volumes. But they work very cooperative with DDOT.
And specifically San Francisco, I think they were the first one to do this, and they received a little bit more cooperation, but I think as the demands on data started to grow, the stance maybe has changed.
All right, so we'll continue for 120 days.
Thank you.
See how the conversations go.
Appreciate it.
And we'll update then.
Okay.
All right, that brings us to item number 13.
Mr. Chairman, a report from the Transportation Department relative to reducing the impact of traffic redirected by mapping applications such as Apple Maps, Google, Waze, into residential neighborhoods.
Marcel Porras, Chief Sustainability Officer, LA DOT.
Brian Gallagher, Senior Transportation Engineer, District Operations, DOT.
So this report we're reporting back on the status of our discussions, not only with Waze to renegotiate a kind of data sharing agreement, but also at the direction of this committee. We spent some time doing some work around creating criteria around what could be looked at as impacted street segments. 'Cause I think one of the major concerns that we've heard about is the impact of mapping apps routing drivers through sensitive areas. And so Brian can talk a little bit about the criterion, but overall we're looking for overall kind of approval of the list of criterion that we've developed. And we anticipate going back and sitting down with the mapping app companies to talk about what a potential pilot would look like in the context of negotiations of a new data sharing agreement.
So we do have a table on page 2 that shows 5 different classifications of areas where we would like to improve our working relationship with these route finding applications. The first is Mobility Plan 2035 street designations, mainly for local streets, where we have streets that are very narrow and not intended or designed to accommodate high volumes of traffic. Oftentimes we end up with standoff situations where the road is not wide enough to handle two-way traffic. And a lot of the times it involves emergency vehicles trying to get to an emergency, and they cannot get by all of the traffic that's being diverted in the opposite direction. And unlike off-peak hours, where it's just one vehicle and they can move up to the next driveway and pull over, when it's a queue of 20 or 30 cars on a block, all those vehicles cannot pull over. Also, even at 600 vehicles per hour on a local street, that's the same as one car every 6 seconds. And if you're trying to turn in or out of your driveway and there's a car coming down the road every 6 seconds, you're never going to get in or out, and that's just going to add to the congestion of cars waiting behind that vehicle to get out. The next category is special events. We want to be able to work with them better when we have the planned special events, like events at the Hollywood Bowl or Dodger Stadium or things like that. We don't want traffic being diverted down residential local streets when they end up having nowhere to go. The third category are emergencies. When we have evacuations, maybe the Sepulveda Basin is flooded, maybe there's a fire somewhere in the hills, we don't need to have vehicles being diverted into the area that we're trying to evacuate, or having vehicles being diverted onto a street where we're trying to get people out of the neighborhood. The fourth are school zones or hours. Again, we want to be able to work with these companies so that during school pickup and drop-off hours, we don't have vehicles that are being diverted onto those streets. Maybe we don't even have large dirt hauler trucks being diverted in front of a school during school hours. And the fifth category is collision data, where we do have the Vision Zero priority corridors, where we have streets where the data shows that maybe we're having safety challenges on those streets. It may not be the best thing to start diverting traffic onto those streets where we're trying to address the safety concerns. All of these 5 categories, we're trying to work to identify ways that the route finding applications can get that information off the Navigate LA or some other database that we have very easily, so it's not going to be a lot of extra work on their part to know what streets we want to make special accommodations on.
So we're available to answer any questions, but I think for us the next steps would be we've shared the report in advance with the mapping companies, but we'd like to sit down and talk to them and get their actual direct feedback from the criterion that we selected and continue discussions about potential pilots and negotiations around data sharing agreements.
Any questions, Ms. Martinez?
So do you have any idea which areas you'd like to include the pilot study in? Do you have any idea of what part of town?
Well, maybe some possible areas for the pilot project would be Hollywood Boulevard or around the Hollywood Bowl. Another area where it might be in Encino Hills, where we have a lot of cut-through traffic from the 405 freeway. Maybe another type of situation would be where we have problems around school zones. An area that was suggested to us was an area where we may have an evacuation plan, maybe down around the beach where we have the tsunami plan evacuation plans or some other evacuation plans for fires in place. We could coordinate with these companies to try to have an integrated plan. And then maybe another opportunity are where we have projects where we have lane utilization projects, where if we're going to put in some safety project along a major arterial to make it safer, we could work with the ways to kind of address the diversion that may result out of that project and to try to keep the traffic from diverting through the neighborhood streets that run parallel to that major street.
Do you have any sense as to which companies are open to working with you, or are we at a dead end?
I think there's definitely interest in, I think folks want to have an agreement with Los Angeles, right?
We need to get buy-in from the companies, so I don't see how this is going to be successful.
Correct. And I think one of the things is going back and sitting down with the companies and negotiating with them on using the pilots that we want to do as a condition.
And what major city has already done something similar?
So they currently, when we've spoken to one of the companies, they point to a standard data sharing agreement that is in over 900 cities. We've done some initial kind of touching base with some major metropolitan cities, and I think that there's an existing desire to kind of revisit what these look like, but it just hasn't been a priority for other cities. And so I think that we want to really start having meaningful conversations about what it would mean to change the contract. I think for companies, they want something that can scale and everyone can sign on to. And so I think it is going to be voluntary, on a voluntary basis from them until we can create like a working legal definition of our right to assert authority over them. And so, but I think that one of the questions is about entering into partnership and understanding if the technology and the criterion can merge together to actually do some findings, and that might, I think that's a good story for companies, right, to be able to promote safety. But I think that ultimately, this is something that is a big issue that we've heard from a lot of different constituents, and I think something that is going to continue to need to be discussed here at this committee.
Just in general, in this committee, usually the best answer to where you're going to do a pilot is the East Valley and the West Side.
They know that. And Brian Gallagher definitely knows that.
I'm just keeping it real.
A question for you. I'm supportive of this. I mean, I don't know if there's any member of the council who hasn't gotten complaints about cut-through traffic as a result of this. I mean, these programs have lived up to far more of their hype than some other phenomenons. I mean, there are people driving now who've never heard of the Thomas Guide, which was absolutely unheard of. Sadly, some of our fire stations still have them because the technology isn't good enough. But this has really given people an easier way to find their way around Los Angeles without driving with a book in their laps and stuff like that. But there has been this consequence of a lot of neighborhood cut-through traffic. And I've noticed that the different apps are different. I've discovered that for whatever reason, Apple Maps doesn't guide me into a residential neighborhood nearly as frequently as, say, Waze. Others may have had different experiences. I've started using Apple Maps more because I want to get from point A to point B without getting stuck forever in traffic. But I also don't want to have to be listening for directions every 13 seconds. Go left, go right, go left, go right. Try to turn left on Olympic and rush hour traffic, kind of stuff. So it's simpler. And I know some of the apps have a setting where you can say, yes or no to whether or not I'll take toll roads, yes or no to whether or not I'll take freeways. Do any of them, to your knowledge, have the ability to toggle on and off whether or not you want to cut through neighborhood streets? I mean, my guess is most people actually would prefer not to go like this through a residential neighborhood in order to save a minute. They might just save 15, but certainly, not for a short period of time. Do any of them have that ability?
Not that I know of specifically. I know that there had been previous discussions about making that option available, particularly like, making left turns out of neighborhoods, like unprotected left turns, right? And so I think that those are the types of conversations that with a broader now understanding of what we want to prioritize, we can have, right? I think these are different types of solutions, but I think it's about sitting down and having those conversations with them and revisiting them. I think in the last round of conversations that we had with companies, there was, Apple Maps was in the room, Google Maps, Waze, which are they're two separate mapping apps, and so we're going to continue to have the conversations. I think we're also interested in continuing to see what our other cities are doing nationally. I think this is not just an issue that exists in Los Angeles. But I think it is, I think there is an interest in understanding how we can partner. The question will just be, do we agree on the terms of what these pilots look like and what, who actually is ground truth, right, for safety and neighborhood impact.
Yeah. Okay. So unless there's any thoughts contrary, the recommendation of the committee would be to receive and file the report, approve Mobility Plan 2035 street designations as initial criteria to identify impacted street segments, direct LA DOT to include a pilot program restricting the routing of vehicles onto impacted street segments as a condition of entering into any data sharing agreements with developers of mobile mapping applications, and direct DOT to report back in 90 days on the status of negotiations. All good?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that brings us to, that's the end of the regular agenda. All right, we have 2 items on the special, so we will adjourn the regular. And okay, we have 2 items on the special, and we have a couple multiple comment cards. One from Eric Previn. Mr. Previn? Get you down for items 1 and 2.
Thank you. It's Eric Previn from Studio City, and I'm noticing item 2, which is the Low Carbon Transit Operations Grant Award of up to $1.187 million from the state, California Department of Transportation, to provide free fare on Dash services for LA Unified and for Los Angeles Community College District students. And I think it sounds great. I mean, this is a grant money, and I'm assuming that this is for the Dash service that gets you close to the metro. Is that what Dash is? We have Dash, but it hasn't been specified exactly. I'm sure it has somewhere. But I'm very supportive of this. I like the idea of lowering the barriers to people using the accessible transportation that can get them close. We have big problems in Studio City where we have lots of people who would like to use the metro. I know Councilmember Martinez has been worried about the red line, but we're not worried about it. We want to use it. We want it to be safe, of course, and we want our passengers and constituents to have, good solutions. And Dash buses, which if somebody wants to tell me that's not what Dash buses are, you idiot, now would be the time. But it's my understanding that they get you very close, and it's a good program. I think Sheila Kuehl had something to do with starting it. I think these are good programs. I just don't know if they're going to be widespread for the whole population, or how we're going to, apply these to, I mean, it makes sense to have them available at schools to the points of transportation, but I look forward to seeing how such a program could work effectively in our area. One of the other things is that kids who do have to travel to go to school have to sometimes use facilities. And currently, I know you're not on the Metro Board, Martinez, but you are, Mr. Bonin, and I know Mensman's here with Krikorian. We really would like a mobile pit stop. And those are facilities where you can use a bathroom while traveling, sometimes where you're changing between the train and the Orange Line. And so we have a lot of kids who ride the Red Line. There isn't one now. And I just think that not just children, but older people, workers who have to travel from out of the, who can't live in Studio City, so they have to travel to work there, deserve a chance to have a mobile pit stop. We'd like CD2 to step forward along with CD4 and get us one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Ms. Ramirez here?
She was earlier.
Okay, so
She might have head on to her next committee.
cards for both, but she's not here. So there is no further public comment on this. Unless you have questions on either of these items, Ms. Martinez, I recommend we...
I do not, sir.
All right, so both of these items are deemed approved, and we are adjourned. Thank you.